Hi, and welcome back to our very last video on the subject of theological prolegomena. In our last video, I promised you an entryway into the faith, a way that is, a beginning point for starting to believe, and a way to interact with the faith from a standpoint of not necessarily already believing. That entry point is a historical occurrence that we call the resurrection of Jesus. Now, what I want to do is I want to take the resurrection of Jesus and move it out of the world of faith and belief and into the world of historic fact. I believe the resurrection occurred, but it's not true because I believe it. It's either true or false. It either did occur or it did not occur. If it did occur, then the Christian faith has a firm foundation and starting point for belief that God has entered into human history in Jesus of Nazareth. If the resurrection is false, then the faith is false as well. Now, I don't think it is possible to prove with absolute 100% beyond a shadow of a doubt certainty that Jesus rose from the dead. I do, however, think it is very possible to show that the probability of the resurrection is very, very high. So high that rejecting it would seem to be foolish given the evidence. Now again, I want to stress, I'm speaking of the resurrection as a historical occurrence, not as an element of our faith for this present video. I want to give credit where credit is due for a lot of what I'm going to say. It's not original with me. This is something that I first heard as a teenager when watching Christian TV, if you can believe that. Those of you who know me know my opinion of Christian television. But when I was growing up as a child, my parents didn't attend church very much. And they were usually listening to Bible teachers that were sort of on the fringe of Christianity. And a lot of them I just couldn't stand. I never really told my mom and dad that. But a lot of the word faith people that they followed and all, it just turned me off. I couldn't stand their message until one day when I was a teenager. Well, I wasn't even a teenager yet. I think I was only 12. Maybe I was 13. We got a satellite dish, and I saw Gene Scott for the first time. Now, those of you may remember Gene Scott. He was a cigar-smoking, cussing preacher from Los Angeles, California. But something in Gene Scott connected with something in me. And it made me, for the first time in my life, feel that it was possible to believe and still be intelligent at the same time. That I didn't have to pretend like I was a dummy in order to believe in Jesus, and that intelligent faith was actually possible. In my fundamentalist, fringe Pentecostal childhood, that was unthinkable until I crashed into Gene Scott. And Scott's teaching on the resurrection of Jesus just made an unbelievable impression in my life. And what I'm about to say, really, those words are mostly his. If you know of Scott, you probably don't like him. Few people did. But when he spoke on the resurrection, it just triggered something inside me. And I want to try to utilize his words mixed with my own, but again, to avoid that evil sin of plagiarism, I'm telling you, a lot of this is his. Most of it is his. And I just want you to hear what turned me on to the idea of an intelligent faith. And it just, it transformed my life. And I never was able to thank him personally for this. He's dead now, and Lord willing, I'll see him in glory and thank him there. But one of the things that we have to remember about the resurrection is that it's based on the life of Jesus. And when we encounter Jesus, even today, now I realize that when Scott did this, it was in another day and another time, but even in our early 21st century, we still run into people talking about Jesus being a good and wise teacher. Now, Josh McDowell has done some work with this too, and he came up with the idea of liar, lunatic, or Lord. Because to say that Jesus is a good and wise teacher is not accurate when you consider the breadth and depth of the other things that he said. He basically said he was divine. I and my Father are one. So if he is not divine, then he's wrong. Now, he could either be wrong in two ways. He could be sincere about what he said and just delusional. That would make him a lunatic. Or he would know he was wrong and say it anyway. That would make him a liar. Or he could be absolutely right about who he said he was, and that would make him the Lord. So that is Josh McDowell's liar, lunatic, and Lord conundrum for those who would say Jesus is a good and wise teacher. If he is not God, then he either isn't good in that he knows he's lying, or he's not wise. He's delusional. But if he's Lord, then he's not good and wise. He's the Lord. So we have to be careful about how we address Jesus and how we talk about him. And not so much us. We believe him to be Lord. But the outside world will still say he is a good and wise teacher, but stop short of calling him Lord. Well, if he's not the Lord, then he's either not good or he's not wise. We could talk about the historical quests for Jesus, the quest for the historical Jesus, rather. They all seem to wind up with a mirror image of the quester. In our day, as we move more toward a postmodern age, the interest in the metaphysical Jesus, who Jesus really is, doesn't seem to be that high. But I don't want to give in to the spirit of our age and neglect that, because where we're at theologically, we are looking at a time where it seems metaphysics don't matter, but these questions will always come back. It will always come back to the question that Jesus gave his disciples at Caesarea Philippi. Notice I'm from West Virginia and I pronounce it correctly. Caesarea Philippi. Who do men say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And so that is such an important question that even in an age where the metaphysics and the real who of that is somewhat ignored, it'll always come back to us. Again, we can't be certain of the resurrection. All the eyewitnesses are dead. No one is alive. Who was alive then? But we can have a probability that is so high that it would seem foolish to dismiss the conclusions that he rose based upon the evidence. Now here's where Scott's analysis comes into play. There are 8 claims of the life of Jesus. Claims that no matter where you read in the New Testament or any other historical source that delves into such claims, they make. Even in the spurious documents, the apocryphal New Testament, even has him making these claims too. And let's look at them quickly. He thought he was perfect. He had all authority seated in himself. He spoke of eternity as one who was an insider. He had been there, knows it intimately. He saw himself at the center of... there were 6 claims. Saw himself as the center of the religious universe. That he is the God. That the world was messed up, and the only thing that would make it right was his death, and he claimed that he would rise again. Now, Scott does an excellent job of going through the scriptures on these. I won't, because I think we can take them all at face value. we do see in the life of Jesus that he thought he was perfect. Of course, we believe as Christians that he was perfect. But we don't even need to go that far. All we need to see is that he thought he was perfect. His claim to perfection is straightforward in Scripture. Number two, that he saw all authority in himself, evident in both his actions and his words. Spoke of eternity as an insider, his intimate relationship with the Father. Behold, I saw Satan as lightning fall from heaven. Those types of things are insider of an eternity, as well as the center of all the religious universe, the center of all things religious. His words and deeds point to that. Again, he claimed that the world was messed up, could only be made right by his death. Finally, destroy this temple in 3 days, I'll raise it up. We know that the Jesus of the Gospels, and even the Jesus of the spurious Gospels, is this Jesus. He's the one that is making these claims. And we also can certainly see that these are not the claims of a good and wise teacher, who is not God incarnate. Because if they were, if he's not God, how can he make these claims? He's either deluded into thinking he is God, or he's just an outright fraud. So these are the claims of Jesus. Now let's look at some fixed reference points that Scott comes up with, and I'll modify and add to a little bit. Number one, Jesus lived. There's really no debating that now. Number two, that he was crucified by the Romans at the instigation of the Jewish leaders. Number three, he was considered dead. Number four, he was buried in a known, accessible tomb. That the tomb was part of public knowledge. Number five, that he was preached, raised, ascended, and the tomb empty. That the Jewish leaders had the most to lose by his resurrection. The disciples were horribly persecuted, and the tomb was empty. These 8 facts are what we must presuppose before we begin talking about the resurrection of Jesus. But I see no problem with them. I see no reason to discount any of them. That he lived, of course he lived. If he didn't live, that'd be the end of that. That he was crucified, all historical sources say he was crucified by the Romans because of the leaders. That he was buried in the known accessible tomb. That he was preached, raised, ascended, the tomb empty. That still occurs every time we preach the gospel today. Of course, the Jewish leaders had the most to lose because they are the ones who are ultimately responsible for his death. It was they reacted in a him or us situation, so they killed him. Of course, history bears out that the disciples were horribly persecuted and that there was an empty tomb. If the tomb was not empty, produce the body. End of discussion. So that frame of reference, I think, is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Now, when we get down to the explanations for why the tomb is empty, this is where things get a little interesting. And Scott lists these, and these are the historical arguments anyway. Number one, that the disciples stole the body, that they orchestrated the theft of Jesus' body and then told this story to cover it up. Number two, the Jews stole the body, the Jewish leaders, that is, that they wanted the body in their possession. Number three, the Romans stole the body. Can't really say why that makes any sense, but anyway, that's been put forth. Number four, the women went to the wrong tomb. They reported the wrong tomb being empty. Number five, he revived. The swoon theory of Schleiermacher, that he was only seemed to be dead, but in the coolness of the tomb revived. Number six is that it was a mass hallucination, that they all were chewing on some good mushrooms or something and just dreamed it. They were like Creedence Clearwater Revival. They were looking out their back door or something. I don't know. 7, that they lied, and 8, that they told the truth. Now, I'm going to reduce this list of 8 to a list of 2. They lied or they told the truth. because we can eliminate numbers 1 through 6, or we can collapse any of numbers 1 through 6 into number 7, that is, they lied. If the disciples stole the body, which is highly unlikely, but I suppose theoretically possible, even though there was a Roman guard detachment in place at the tomb, if the disciples stole the body, then they lied. They made up a story. So number 1 becomes number 7. Number 2, the Jews stole the body. That's ludicrous. They had the most to lose if the resurrection occurred. They would always want to have a body. Moreover, they're the ones that asked the Romans to guard the tomb lest his body be stolen. They would be the last ones who would want to steal the body, so they wouldn't do it. Again, the Romans, what would they want to steal the body for? They're in charge. They don't need the body of a dead revolutionary or someone that they perceive to be a contender for Caesar's throne to come up missing. There's no reason for the Jews or the Romans to steal the body. So we can eliminate numbers 2 and number 3. Number 4, the women went to the wrong tomb. That would only work until daybreak as an explanation. Because if you went to the wrong tomb, then go to the right tomb. The tomb was known and accessible. If they made a mistake and went to the wrong tomb, I suppose that's possible, but daybreak and proper directions would fix all mistakes. So really, the idea that the women went to the wrong tomb is not tenable either. So number 4 is no good. Number 5, the swoon theory, was pretty popular a couple hundred years ago, or almost a couple hundred years ago. But in reality, that doesn't work either. Jesus was beaten and whipped and just treated horribly on the cross. And they pronounced him dead. If he wasn't dead already, then the spear wound through the rib that pierced his heart and from which blood and water flowed out, that would have killed him. And even though that's a ridiculous theory, even if he gets into the tomb, then explain how he gets out. Even if he revives in the tomb, there's a rock in front of it and a Roman soldier detachment out there. He's certainly not strong enough to move the rock himself. If physically healthy women can't move that rock, a man beaten within an inch of his life can't move that rock. So the swoon theory doesn't tell us why the tomb's empty. The hallucinations aren't possible either. If hallucinations did occur, which I suppose would be theoretically possible, although highly unlikely, it's not the type of situation where that could actually take place. So the idea that they all were hallucinating and they all made up a story that's remarkably similar because of their own crazed with grief state is beyond belief. So we're really down to either the disciples lied or they told the truth. And that's always been the question anyway. Is their witness credible? They're the ones that report Jesus raised from the dead. They're the ones that report that he is now alive and forevermore to be alive. So is their witness credible? And I believe that it is, and for 4 reasons that these again are Scott's, but I'm going to add to a little bit of it. Character change for better among the disciples is number 1. Number 2, internal evidence of consistency and truth within the Gospels themselves. Number 3, that the disciples were horribly persecuted for their message. And number 4, that they died and died alone. Let's look quickly at character change. First of all, we have Peter. Peter is the leader of the apostles, but Peter is unstable. 1 minute he's up, 1 minute he's down. He's the one who says, "Never will I leave you," and then before the rooster crows, he denies Jesus. He says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." 5 seconds later, Jesus is saying, "Get thee behind me, Satan." So Peter's pretty inconsistent. He means well, but he doesn't do well. After the resurrection, Peter becomes the leader of the apostles, the leader of the church. He's the one who preaches the sermon on the day of Pentecost. He's the one chosen to bring the Gentiles into the church. He's the one who is always, with the one exception of Paul withstanding him to his face, he's the one who is seen as to be the rock, the foundation of the church, the one who is the unquestioned leader, at least in its early days. And so that is character change. And my question that I think needs to be answered is although I believe basing one's life on a lie will change someone's character, will that change them for the better? Will they come out of living a lie a better man? And if Peter lied about Jesus, he comes out a better man. And so I don't think that change is based on a lie. Take John, for example. John is one of the sons of thunder in the scriptures. He's the one who is so wimpy that he asks his mom to ask Jesus if he can sit on his right hand and his brother James on his left in the kingdom. So he's a wimp and he's mean. Call fire down from heaven to destroy enemies. Once the resurrection occurs, we see John in his writings as the apostle of love. The Gospel of John, the epistles of John, Revelation, love, 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 love. He goes from being a son of thunder to the apostle of love. He goes from being one who would ask his mother to ask Jesus to be on his right or left hand to be the only one of the apostles who, as far as we know, lived out his life in exile, some ways worse than death. Character change? Absolutely. Character change for the better? Yes. Will a lie change a man for the better? Again, I don't think so. I believe John told the truth. James, the brother of Jesus, followed him afar off during Jesus' lifetime. Was said that when he sought him, when the paralytic man was healed by lowering him through the roof, he says, "My brother, who are my mother and my brothers?" He was one of the brothers that wanted to lay hands on Jesus. Now, and that's not in the Pentecostal sense. He wanted to take hold of him and slap some sense into him, probably. After the resurrection, becomes the leader of the church at Jerusalem. Even though he was close to the religious leaders, he wouldn't deny Jesus, and they wound up killing him. Character change? Yep. Will a lie change a man for the better? Nope. He honestly reported what he saw. Finally, Thomas. Thomas was a realist. Always was a realist. They faced their journey through Samaria, as Scott has said over and over. I apologize to Scott. I apologize to you. This has become part of me too. So it's his words and mine, and I'm acknowledging them to be in full honesty and full disclosure. But it's just something that's been part of me for so long. I'm going to sound like him, but he said, "Let us also go that we may die with him," on the journey to Samaria. Thomas asked in John 14, "How do we know where you're going, and how do we know the way?" But then when Thomas is given the opportunity to touch Jesus' hands in his side, the words that come out of his mouth, "My Lord and my God." And even sitting here talking into this video camera on my laptop, tears are welling up in my eyes at the power behind Thomas's words, "My Lord and my God." What a confession. He never doubted again. Even though we call him Doubting Thomas, his days of doubting ended right there when he touched the hands inside of his Lord and his God. And so character change, absolutely. Character change for the better, yep. Will a lie change a man for the better? Nope. I cannot believe they lied. And those are just 4 examples. You can look at others. I don't think we have better evidence on other apostles and other followers of Jesus, because we really have a before and after of those 4. But their characters all changed with this event of Jesus' death and resurrection. And in every case that we have a before and after snapshot, that change has been for the better. It has been an improvement in their character. And so that improvement, to me, yields that they told the truth. Scott talks about internal evidence, and I'll just quickly gloss this over. Mark was written to Alexandrian Gentiles, and yet Mark uses a Jewish messianic term, Son of Man, for Jesus. He could have used better terminology, is the point. He could have made his case better. He could have made it stronger, more convincing. But he chose not to. which historically is a sign of honesty. It shows that it wasn't edited over. It shows it wasn't cleaned up and fixed up. It is what it is. Others include the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 occurred at Bethsaida. We learn in another gospel that Philip was from Bethsaida. And so then Jesus asked Philip, where will we buy bread for all these people? But all those three snippets come out of three different gospels, and none of them connect all the facts together. That had it been edited, had it been told for a lie's posterity's sake, it would have been wise to have said, Philip, since you're from here, where will we buy bread for these people? Philip would have known where Walmart was, or Harris Teeter, or Food Lion, or Kroger's, or wherever. Of course, Walmart was in Bethsaida in those days. It's probably a super center. But we're not told in that gospel that was Philip's hometown. The incredible deaths that they suffered. These are all from Christian history and from our heritage, but Peter crucified upside down, Andrew crucified on St. Andrew's cross, James and Paul beheaded, John suffered to exile in Patmos, Bartholomew skinned alive with a whip, Thomas killed with a sword, Mark dragged to death, Luke hanged, over and over and over again, these horrible deaths that they suffered. And they knew that the story that they told would produce this kind of suffering. Now, if they were lying, why would they risk such horrible suffering and horrible death for something that they knew was a lie? It's one thing for you or I to suffer for the sake of Jesus' story. We weren't eyewitnesses. We don't have the historic certainty that Paul and well, not so much even Paul, that Peter and James and John and Matthew and Bartholomew, they had absolute historic certainty. They were eyewitnesses. And if they had made up a lie, then they had gotten together and concocted a story. And if they were lying, why would they suffer persecution for it? They knew better. They knew if Peter was one of the architects of the resurrection story, why would he suffer for it? Makes no sense. I mean, it might be okay to gather some disciples and gather some modicum of power and authority, but when the rubber meets the road and you're going to be crucified for what you're saying, why do it? And that leads to the idea that they died, and they died alone. Once Acts 15, the Council of Jerusalem occurs, the persecution comes in Jerusalem, and the disciples scatter. They go all over the place. Tradition says they went to India, to Rome, and all points in between, north and south. They knew, or they probably would have known, that the chances of them ever seeing one another again alive were almost zero. And yet they continued to persevere and continued to proclaim the same message and continued to suffer and die for it. Now, I can understand maybe, just maybe, that if they all stayed together, they would hold to their story like honor among thieves. But separate them and have them continue to proclaim and have them continue to be persecuted for it, that's just beyond, that's the limit of my belief there. I cannot see that they would be separated by miles and miles and hundreds of miles with no communication whatsoever and still hold to the message if they knew it were a lie. So those four reasons are sufficient for me, sufficient for Scott first, and then when I heard it, they became sufficient for me without changing them hardly at all, that the disciples were telling the truth, that the message is true to the best of their understanding, that they are credible witnesses, and that the resurrection therefore did occur, and that they were right in what they said, and then therefore that it makes Jesus who he says he is, that his claims to perfection and centrality of the universe and insider of eternity, all those claims are validated by his resurrection. and that not only is he a good and wise teacher, but he's the Lord. He is God in the flesh. He is our starting point for understanding who God is. He is the full and final revelation of God. He is the one with whom oneness with God is embodied. He is the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega of all things. And therefore, he is the one whose claim of oneness with the Father is true. That all flows from the resurrection being a historical event that therefore validates the words of Jesus. The degree of probability, remember, certainty is not possible, but the degree of probability that the resurrection is true is very, very high. And it's enough to warrant that we believe that it is indeed factual. Once we believe in the resurrection being factual, then we must believe that Jesus' claims are likewise factual. And what does that do for us as theologians, and what does that do to our theological method? Well, what it does is it gives us a way to understand God apart from abstract metaphysical speculation. We're not just sitting puffing on a cigar and saying, well, I think God's like this, or I think God's like that, or God must do this, or God must be this because of this, that, and the other. No, we have Jesus. We have a literal, physical, flesh and blood human being who was crucified, died, and rose again on the third day. And that resurrection validates all of the claims he made about who God is and who he is. Therefore, we've got something far better than Plato or Aristotle or any other philosopher. We've got something that will stand the test of showing who God is apart from what we can speculate with our minds. We will use God's revelation of himself in history then as our guide, rather than our intuition as our guide, as most of philosophy has done down through time. What this does is it gives us not only what our main idea of hermeneutic is, that the love of the Father and the Son is the central key of Scriptures. This also makes the Son the central revelation of God. So, if you want to know what God's like, look at Jesus. Whatever Jesus is, whoever Jesus is, that's who God is. He and the Father are one. So if you've seen him, you've seen the Father. Our intuition of how we think God ought to be is faulty, and it leads us into trouble. And a lot of Christians will use their intuition to say what God ought to be, and then pull out scriptures to back it up. But that's not the proper starting point, and it's not the right methodology. The right methodology is to begin with the one who reveals God fully, the Son of God, Jesus of Nazareth, God in human flesh. He is the starting point for all of our theological endeavors. He's the one that we look to when we think of God. When we think of God, we must see Jesus. Therefore, the resurrection of Jesus is our doorway to the faith, so to speak. It enables us to see the person of God from within the faith and not trust our intuition or our intellectual faculties to get there. We don't have to philosophize, to make up a word, to figure out what God is like. We know what God is like because he's just like Jesus. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So the resurrection of Jesus, then, is a historical occurrence with monumental implications. It is the starting point for belief. It's the way that we know that God has come to us in human flesh. It's the way that it's the place that we can begin. It's the place that we can use as an anchor, as a bedrock. And in the many, many years since I've heard Dr. Scott's sermon on the resurrection of Jesus, my faith has been tried terribly. And I always come back to that as a bedrock. I always come back to that as a launching point again and again, because it's something I can't get around. It's something that I know is true. It's so highly probable that it can't be untrue. And so it gives me an anchor. It gives me a home base, so to speak, to begin. Even when the trials of life sweep away what I've built on that foundation remains. And it will remain with me for the rest of my life. And I hope that you will internalize it the way I have. And the resurrection of Jesus as a fixed point of history takes everything out of the realm of metaphysical speculation and transfers it into the time and place of the life of Jesus of Nazareth. It transfers us into an actual physical event of history. And therefore, because it's an event of history, it's not a vision in a cave like Muhammad had, or even words from God on a mountain like the prophets of Israel, or inner impressions or anything like that. No, this was a man who was dead and now he is alive. A tomb is empty that once was filled. Whether or not you believe it, it's a fact. And whereas we can't judge visions, we can't judge impressions, we can surely judge the veracity, the truthfulness of documentable facts. And the facts of the case and all of the evidence of the case point to Jesus coming out of the tomb. And if he came out of that tomb, then we have a starting point for God because of his claims. We have a starting point for faith because if he can overcome death and promise that we will too, if he did it, why not believe him that we can do it as well in him? So that's the historical foundation of our method. We've talked about love. We've talked about prayer. We've talked about the creeds and the confessions. We've talked about spiritual formation. Now we have an anchor in history. The resurrection of Jesus is the historical anchor for our theological method, because what the resurrection shows us is that there is a God and his name is Jesus, that he is the revelation of God in human flesh, and he shows us fully and finally what God is like. So once we have that, and couple that with the idea of the love between the Father and the Son being the hermeneutical key of the Scriptures, trust and obey as the main element of our formation, love one another as I have loved you, love God and love neighbor as you love yourself, and pray always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit without ceasing, making your requests known unto God. That is the best theological foundation for methodology that I know of. I hope you've enjoyed this little series. The resurrection of Jesus to me is the capstone of it. And now we have a methodology for doing theology in our world. We have a way of grasping God, a starting point to enter, and then a methodology to continue, and rules of engagement to follow. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's helped you. I hope you can grow from it. I hope you can modify it and add to it as time goes along. I thank you for joining me in it, and I pray that you will find it all very helpful. And until we meet again, have a great day, and thanks for listening. Bye now.